The room went quiet the moment the orange juice hit the janitor's uniform. It wasn't the spill that shocked the guests, it was the way the billionaire's daughter looked at him afterward, like he was nothing more than a stain on the floor. Crystal glasses, silk dresses, and polished marble filled the grand ballroom of the Beaumont Foundation's annual charity dinner. The richest families in the city gathered here every year, pretending to care about the causes printed on their donation cards. Cameras flashed. Waiters moved silently between tables, and near the corner wall, a janitor quietly mopped the floor. His name was Laurent Dumas. Most people in the room didn't notice him, which was exactly how he preferred it. Near the center table sat 20-year-old Camille Beaumont, the only daughter of billionaire investor Philippe Beaumont.
Oh.
She had grown up surrounded by luxury so constant that she rarely questioned it. Tonight she wore a silver dress worth more than most people's rent. She lifted her glass of orange juice while laughing with her friends. Then she turned too quickly. The drink slipped from her hand. The juice splashed across Laurent's dark cleaning uniform, dripping down the front of his shirt and onto the marble floor he had just finished polishing. A few nearby guests gasped. Laurent stopped moving but didn't react. Camille looked down at him with mild irritation rather than embarrassment. "Seriously?" she said. "You were standing too close." The words hung in the air. Laurent slowly set the mop against the wall. "I apologize if I was in your way," he said calmly. But Camille wasn't finished. "You janitors always do this," she muttered, wiping juice from her hand with a napkin. "Just hovering around like furniture." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. One of Camille's friends laughed softly. Laurent reached into his pocket and removed a small handkerchief, calmly wiping the juice from his sleeve. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked directly at Camille and spoke again. But this time it wasn't English. "Je vous assure, mademoiselle, que je ne cherche perturbe votre soirée. I assure you, miss, that I was not trying to disturb your evening." The sentence flowed from him effortlessly, perfectly. The accent wasn't clumsy, it was Parisian. Conversations around the table stopped immediately. Camille blinked. "You speak French?" she asked, confused. Laurent tilted his head slightly. "Carrément," he replied, fluently. Across the room, Philippe Beaumont turned sharply, because there was something about the janitor's voice that suddenly sounded very familiar. And in that moment, the man everyone thought was just cleaning the floor had the entire ballroom paying attention. The laughter at Camille's table vanished instantly. Guests who had been chatting moments earlier slowly turned their heads toward the corner of the ballroom. A janitor speaking flawless French in a room full of billionaires was unexpected enough, but the calm confidence in Laurent Dumas's voice made the moment even stranger. "You're French?" she asked, as if the idea didn't quite make sense. Laurent wiped the last drop of juice from his sleeve before answering. "Oui," he said simply. "Je suis né à Lyon." "Yes, I was born in Lyon." The accent was unmistakable. At the head table across the room, Philippe Beaumont slowly set down his wine glass. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Then he stood. Several guests noticed immediately. When a man like Philippe Beaumont stood in the middle of his own charity gala, people paid attention. Conversations lowered to whispers as he began walking across the ballroom. Camille looked over her shoulder. "Dad?" she said, confused. Philippe didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on Laurent. The janitor stood calmly beside his mop, looking neither embarrassed nor intimidated. If anything, he seemed slightly amused by the attention suddenly gathering around him. Philippe stopped a few steps away. For a long moment, he simply studied Laurent's face. Then he spoke quietly in French. SECEQ, nous connaissons. Do we know each other? Laurent met his gaze without hesitation. Je pense que oui. I believe we do. The tension in the air sharpened. Camille looked between them, completely lost. What is going on? She demanded. Felipe didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to Laurent, examining him more carefully, now as if trying to unlock a memory that had been buried for years. Finally, something in his expression changed. Recognition. His eyes widened slightly. That's impossible, he murmured. Laurent's lips curved into a small, patient smile. Bonsoir, Monsieur Beaumont, he said. Felipe took a step back. You're Laurent Dumas, he said slowly. The room fell silent. Camille blinked. That's what his name tag says, she replied, still confused. But Felipe wasn't looking at the name tag. He was looking at the man. He disappeared 15 years ago, Felipe continued quietly. Several nearby guests leaned closer, sensing something unusual unfolding. Laurent shrugged lightly. Life becomes complicated, he said. Camille crossed her arms. Okay, someone explain what's happening, she said impatiently. Felipe finally turned toward his daughter. His voice was calm but serious in a way Camille had rarely heard before. Laurent Dumas, he said, was once the most respected financial strategist in Europe. The ballroom erupted into murmurs. Camille's mouth fell open. She looked back at the janitor, then at the mop, then at the cleaning cart. You're kidding, she said. Laurent chuckled softly. People change professions sometimes, he replied. But Philippe shook his head slowly. No, he said quietly. You didn't change professions. He looked directly at Laurent. You vanished after saving 3 governments from a financial collapse. The silence in the ballroom became absolute. Camille stared at the janitor again. It's time she wasn't seeing a janitor anymore. The ballroom no longer looked at Laurent Dumas the same way. Moments earlier, he had been invisible a janitor, quietly cleaning the floor after wealthy guests spilled their drinks. Now every eye in the light. Camille Beaumont stood frozen beside the table. You're saying, she began slowly, looking between her father and the man holding the mop, that our janitor used to be some kind of financial genius? Laurent sighed softly, as if the attention had become mildly inconvenient. I wouldn't use that word, he replied calmly. Philippe Beaumont didn't look amused. You disappeared after the Paris market crisis, Philippe continued, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. 3 governments were on the verge of bankruptcy. Banks were collapsing. Investors were panicking. Several older guests nodded quietly. He remembered that year. Laurent leaned against the handle of the mop, relaxed. It was a stressful week, he said lightly. Camille blinked. A week, she repeated. Felipe exhaled slowly. Laurent developed the emergency restructuring plan that stabilized the markets overnight, he said. Without it, Europe might have entered a financial depression. Whispers spread through the ballroom. Some guests began quietly pulling out their phones. Camille looked at Laurent again, studying his face more carefully now.
You're serious,
she said. Laurent shrugged. Numbers are predictable, he said. People aren't. Philippe stepped closer. But after that, he said quietly, you refused every job offer in the world. Laurent nodded. That part is true. Then you vanished, Felipe added. No interviews, no consulting firms, no banks. Laurent picked up the mop again and slowly dipped it into the bucket. Sometimes disappearing is the smartest investment, he said. Camille looked completely bewildered. So instead you decided to mop floors. Laurent glanced up, temporarily. Felipe raised an eyebrow. 15 years is temporary. Laurent's smile widened slightly. You'd be surprised how quickly time moves when you're no longer chasing money. The sentence landed heavily, especially in a room where almost everyone had built their lives chasing exactly that. Camille looked down at the small stain of orange juice still drying on the marble floor. Her voice was quieter now. I didn't know, she said. Laurent studied her for a moment. No, he agreed. You didn't. For the first time since the spill, Camille actually looked embarrassed. Philippe folded his arms. There's still something I don't understand, he said. Laurent tilted his head. What's that? Philippe glanced around the luxurious ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, expensive dresses, the million-dollar donation boards displayed along the walls. Then he looked back at the janitor. A man who could control global markets doesn't become a janitor by accident. Laurent leaned the mop against the cardigan. His eyes moved briefly across the crowd before returning to Felipe. "You're right," he said. The room leaned closer. "Then why?" Felipe asked. Laurent paused. Then he answered with the same calm voice he had used all evening. "Because the people in this room," he gestured lightly toward the guests, "are exactly the reason I needed to." The sentence landed in the ballroom like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, nobody spoke. Music had already stopped. The servers had paused mid-step. And the glittering charity gala now felt less like a celebration and more like a quiet courtroom, where everyone suddenly wondered what role they were playing. Felipe Beaumont narrowed his eyes slightly. "What do you mean by that?" he asked. Laurent Dumas rested his hands lightly on the cleaning cart, looking around the room with the calm patience of someone who had studied rooms like this for decades. "For years," Laurent said, "I advised governments and banks about money." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I realized something strange." Guests shifted uncomfortably. "People who manage millions," he continued, "often forget how ordinary people actually live." Camille looked down at the marble floor. Her spilled orange juice was still faintly visible. Laurent nodded toward the stain. "A small spill to you," he said gently, "but to the man cleaning it, it might be the 10th one tonight." The room stayed silent. Laurent continued calmly. "So 15 years ago I stepped away from the world of finance." Philippe crossed his arms. "2 clean floors?" Laurent shook his head. "To observe people." He gestured around the ballroom. "Restaurants, hotels, office towers, events like this." The realization slowly spread across several faces. "You've been studying people?" Philippe asked. Laurent smiled slightly. "Markets are built on human behavior," he replied. "You understand behavior much better when people think you're invisible." Camille looked up again, this time with a completely different expression. "You let people treat you like that on purpose?" she asked. Laurent nodded. "Every reaction reveals something." Philippe studied him carefully. "And what have you learned from this room tonight?" he asked. Laurent's eyes moved calmly across the guests. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked defensive. Some simply looked thoughtful. Finally, Laurent answered, "I've learned that wealth often makes people louder." He glanced briefly toward Camille's spilled drink. "But kindness makes people visible." The sentence sat quietly in the air. Camille stepped forward slowly, her voice softer now. "I'm sorry," she said.
Oh.
Laurent nodded politely. "Apology accepted," Felipe exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "You could still walk into any bank on the planet tomorrow," he said. "They'd offer you more money than anyone in this room." Laurent smiled again. It's the funny part. He looked down at the mop in his hands. After 15 years watching people chase money, he glanced back up at the crowd. "I'm no longer interested in catching it." The ballroom stayed silent. Because in a room full of billionaires and investors, the only man who truly looked at peace was the one holding the mop.